Welcome. My name is Joe Paprocki. I'm the National Consultant for Faith Formation at Loyola Press, a not-for-profit Jesuit ministry in Chicago. And it is my pleasure today to be hosting, facilitating this webinar, Cannonball Moments, an Ignatian approach to telling your story, with Eric Clayton, who I will introduce to you in just a moment. And in the meantime, thank you all for being here. Lots of folks are still signing on. Lots of folks are going into the chat and introducing themselves. And we have folks from all over the world. And that's so exciting to gather around Ignatian spirituality for this next hour and to share, to learn, to listen. So once again, I welcome all of you, and I invite you to use the chat throughout if you have any questions, comments, or insights to share. Some people find that they're just moved to share a brief little story of their own, and this is all about storytelling. So please do go ahead and use the chat if you have a little tidbit you'd like to share. We will have a Q&A a little later in the presentation, and so you can put questions in as well for Eric. Finally, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to all of you. So if you have to leave early, don't worry, you're not going to miss out on anything. You will be receiving the recording very soon. We usually get that out within a day or so. So it is my pleasure to introduce our guest for today. Let me tell you a little bit about Eric Clayton, who is the author of Cannonball Moments, Telling Your Story, Deepening Your Faith. He is the Deputy Director of Communications at the Jesuit Conference of Canada and the United States. So that's quite a territory that he's covering there. Eric has his bachelor's degree in creative writing and international studies from Fairfield University and an MA in international media from American University. And he lives in Baltimore with his wife, two young daughters, and their cat, Sebastian. You can follow his writings at ericclaytonwrites.com. And as we mentioned, he is the author of the book that this webinar is named after, Cannonball Moments, Telling Your Story, Deepening Your Faith. And we have a QR code on the screen. If you're so inclined, you're welcome to go ahead and scan that, and that will take you right to the Loyola Press store where that book is available. And we'll be showing this again at the end of the webinar, as well as providing information about contacting Loyola Press and other ways to purchase that book. And so it's great to welcome our guest today. Eric, welcome. How are you today?
Thanks, Joe. Doing well. Good to be with you and good to be with everyone on the call. This is so awesome to see all these names and greetings flooding in here. Very exciting.
It is, isn't it? And I would bet when you get time to look over the participant list, you're going to see some people that that you've contacted. You have contacts all over the world from your travels and from your job, and so it's exciting to be able to reach people in this fashion, isn't it?
Yeah, very exciting.
Wonderful. Well, I'm excited to be your host, and I'm excited to get rolling in our story here right away. And we thought it would make a lot of sense for you to fill us in on the title for the book and the webinar, this notion of cannonball moment. I think a lot of people are wondering, where'd you get? Did you make this up? Where did this come from? This notion of a cannonball moment being related to Ignatian storytelling. So tell us what this is all about, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely. So, cannonball moments comes from a very literal cannonball moment. If are familiar with the story of St. Ignatius of Loyola, who is a founder of the Society of Jesus, better known as the Jesuits, right? He started as a soldier. He started kind of a medieval hero, right? And he's leading his troops at the Battle of Pamplona against the superior French forces, and he refuses to surrender. It's a real moment of pride. And he convinces his fellow soldiers to keep fighting. And as a result, they're just wiped out. And our guy Ignatius, he gets a cannonball right to the leg, shatters one leg, breaks another, and he's on his way home to Loyola to recover. And so the cannonball moment comes from that very literal, right, explosive moment. But I think what comes after is actually just as if not important, right? Ignatius goes home to Loyola. He needs time to rest and to recover, and so he's laying out in his bed, and he wants these books that he's accustomed to. He wants to dream about wooing women and winning wars, and instead he's given two books: one on the life of Christ and one on the lives of saints. And so he's laying in his bed and he's thinking, man, I'm dreaming these dreams I've dreamed before of being a saint and a hero and fighting for these worldly powers, and they're not bringing me the kind of consolation I'm accustomed to. They're kind of leaving me feeling a little empty, a little dry. But the more I read these books about Christ and about the saints, the more I feel consoled and I feel God's Spirit working within me. And so what begins as this very bloody, very devastating moment on the battlefield leads to this moment of recovery and reflection and quiet. I think we get stuck on the Cannonball sometimes, and rightly so, because it's big and it's loud and it's traumatic. But it's in this quiet moment where he's reflecting, where he really is able to hear God's Holy Spirit inviting him to something new. And that's really important, right? So that's the thing I think is important, is the Cannonball is that hinge. It's that trajectory changing moment. And then what we do after is often really the important moment. How do we respond to being literally hit with a cannonball? How did Ignatius respond in prayer and reflection? And I think we'll talk a little bit about cannonball moments in our own lives, but that's the story of Ignatius. And one more thing I would say, I think, we're in an Ignatian year. And the Ignatian year began last year with the 500th anniversary of the Cannonball strike. And this Friday is the 501st anniversary of that Cannonball moment, that Battle of Pamplona. So it's important to remember this because it's a global event. It's the entire Ignatian family worldwide.
And so it's a cannonball that caused us to celebrate an Ignatian year, a Jubilee year, 500 years ago last year on May 20th, which also happens to be this year, the 20th anniversary of my hiring at Loyola Press. I was hired on Cannonball Day. And so I guess that was serendipitous. It seems to me that there was quite a comparison here. I'm looking at your quote from the book when you talk about a cannonball moment being a painful moment that knocks us off your feet. And that reminds me too of St. Paul. I think we're all familiar with his story of being knocked off his feet, whether it was a horse or not. But your contention is that all of us can look back on moments in our lives when we've had something comparable to this. Is that your contention?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, hopefully very few of us are actually struck by a cannonball, right? And we shouldn't undermine the significance of such a battle wound, right? Ignatius was severely wounded, and a lot of his fellow soldiers didn't live to tell the tale of their cannonball moments, right? So some of these moments are very traumatic and deserve the time and respect that it requires to work through and care for those kinds of moments. But just because we don't have in our story, readily available some similarly tragic or traumatic event, doesn't mean we don't have a cannonball moment. And I think it's all about that hinge. What knocks us off our feet. It could be painful in the sense that we are looking at what we've done in the past in a new way, and it kind of makes us really go, oh, I can't believe I did that. Or it could be encountering a new person, a new relationship, the birth of a child. Some of these things are really beautiful and really important and amazing, and some of them are hard. Either way, they change the trajectory of our life, right? And so I would argue that most of us, if not all of us, have a cannonball moment, perhaps more than one.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you share that it may not necessarily even be a tragedy or a tragic event of some kind. And you mentioned, meeting a new person or having a child. Talk about being knocked off your feet. When I became a dad, that was wow. That was just complete change of everything that I thought I understood about life and myself. So yeah, it can be something that's a joyous occasion, but still throws you for a loop. And you go forth in your book, in your introduction, to say that this is connected somehow with storytelling. and you begin by talking about storytelling in your own history, your own personal story. And you talk about Kool-Aid, and there's a story about Kool-Aid. So use that as your introduction, as you did in the book, to tell us about this notion of storytelling and how that's come a part of this whole notion of the Cannonball moment.
Yeah, yeah, so when I was little, my grandmother, who I read about, the book is actually dedicated to, and there's a few stories of her in this book. But she used to tell these stories. We'd sit in the back seat of the car, as my parents go in to get the groceries or whatever, and she'd make up these kind of mythical evil bird creatures we called conquerors, and they would they would always kind of appear in these clouds and kind of wreak havoc on me and my friends in the stories, right? She always pulled, who's going to be the story today, Eric? She would say, and for some reason, I don't, again, I was 4 or 5 years old. Kool-Aid was the weapon of choice against which you could disperse the cloud and kind of banish these evil conquerors. Which and that always just stuck with me. It was such an early time, but I think the more I reflect on it, the more I think about how. It seems silly, right? It seems silly and mundane and just like, we're in the backseat, everyone's grandma tells them stories. But I think that's exactly where we meet God, right? In the nitty gritty, in the mundane, in the ordinary. And that's, I think, when we're talking about a spirituality of storytelling, again, like we said, everyone probably has a cannonball moment. But not every moment of our lives is lived in cannonball moments. Thank God for that. Maybe we only have one, kind of trajectory alter, or maybe a handful. We have to recognize and validate and respect, really, right? Those quiet, mundane, everyday moments, because that's where God continues to work. I'm always struck. We know, as Christians, as Catholics, we're made in the image and likeness of God, right? We know that. But I think what Ignatius kind of reminds us when in the spiritual exercises is that we're made in the image and likeness of God, and God, our Creator, desires to continue to deal directly with us, God's beloved creations, right? And what does that mean? Well, that means that every single moment of every single day of everyone's lives is this experience of God continuing to work, to continue to unfold, to continue to kind of make known the mystery. I think there's, I think it was in a book called The Catholic Imagination. The phrasing is something like, the holy is lurking behind every corner. Everything is dripping with grace. And I think that imagery, if we apply it to our stories, our life stories, that everywhere in our stories is dripping with grace. Our God of surprises is hiding behind every corner in our stories, and sometimes in hard, challenging ways, and sometimes in joyful, consoling ways. But if we remember that truth, and then we remember that it applies to everybody, I think it really it changes how we think about our own stories, the value of them, and how we engage with one another.
Well, and I love how, that story of your grandma telling stories to you, I think it brings all of us readers to think about, well, who are the storytellers in my life? Who introduced us to that genre? Because storytelling is so human that, it's just, we are compelled to tell stories. And in your book, you basically are telling us that storytelling is more than just, a fun thing to do to entertain the little kids, that it's an exercise in deepening our faith. And so take us a little further on that. How does storytelling move from being in the backseat of a car talking about mythical creatures who, you have to kill with Kool-Aid, to somehow being related to our faith in God?
Well, I think it's exactly what we were talking about before, right? This idea that if we look at our stories, we look at ourselves, at our lives, and we recognize that God is there at work, and then we share that with other people, right? That's a recognition that I have something valuable, worth giving and worth sharing to the world, something I can't possibly keep kind of just beholden to myself, but it has to be shared with others. And if we do that in a way that is intentional and reflective and says, God is here, then we're reminding ourselves constantly that our stories are God's stories, and that in our story we encounter God, and that in other people's stories we encounter God. And I think kind of to flip it, um, when I think if we look at our world today in so many ways, if we tell ourselves, oh, I have no story, or oh, that's not, I didn't have anything big and traumatic, or I'm not rich and powerful, or whatever it might be. So I'm just a regular schmo. Then that idea, whether we mean to or not, bleeds into our interaction with other people. We tell them they have no stories. We tell, and I'm with my daughters, right? I have a almost 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. I try to pull out of them. Well, what happened at dance class? How was swimming lessons? What did you do at school today? Because I care. I want to know the details. God deals with us in the specific. We should deal with one another in the specific. By doing that, I want to affirm that what they experienced is worth talking about, and beautiful and good, and or perhaps was hard and worth talking about to process. If we don't do that with one another, then look at our world today, and where do we see stories being dismissed, experiences being ignored, people being laughed at because we don't have the time or desire or courage to meet people where they are. I think that you see that play out, and that's a lack of storytelling. It's a lack of allowing stories to expand our imagination. We have a kid's book we read with some frequency, and there's a wonderful line in it that essentially says, are our stories big enough to hold all of us? And are they expanding our imagination, expanding our heart, right? Expanding our capacity to love. And I say all this, I think it sounds, oh, it's wow, like Eric's got these great ideas. It takes work, right? I don't have it done. I haven't done it yet. It's ongoing. It's a verb. It's an action.
Yeah.
And the expanding of is ongoing when we think of our stories. But it begins with having faith that our stories matter, that God is at work in our stories. God is at, we love our neighbor as ourselves. God is at work in other people's stories. And what does that demand of us as a community then in the present moment now, responding to the signs of the times?
Yeah, and you really touched on many things there. But one thing that struck me is you mentioned about how many people feel, well, I don't have a story. There's nothing interesting about me. I would do a lot of work with catechists, people who volunteer to teach the faith to children and young people and adults and so on. And I talk about storytelling with them. And I say, you need to share your stories with them. And very often that's the first reaction is, well, I don't have a story. And I say, well, how did you become a catechist? Tell me that story. And I had one volunteer, who she was like, I don't really have a story. I said, well, how did you become a catechist? She said, well, it's kind of a funny story. It's like she didn't think she had a story until she started telling me. And she said, I was in the back of church after mass and someone said, hey, you. And it turned out to be the parish director of religious ed. She couldn't remember my name. She said, hey, you, and blah, blah, blah. The story went on. And I asked her, how many years ago was that? She said, 33 years ago, and I'm still a catechist. So that's quite a story that you have there. So I guess we need to prompt people to get in touch with their stories and to, how to know that they actually do have a story and that there is such a thing as the spirituality of storytelling.
I mean, I think that's exactly right, and it's a great example. I think I've experienced similar stuff with folks that I'll kind of like accompany in retreat formation. If we're doing a retreat for young adults or for whatever it might be in the community, and or even in college. I remember, so many people would be so excited to lead retreats because they want to accompany people, right? They had a profound experience of the Spirit on the retreat. They want to help bring that to other people, but too often, the retreat talk, they think is just the greatest hits of the worst things that have ever happened. And sometimes that's important, right? I'm not undermining that. That's important to talk about and to process. But sometimes we just need to hear about someone else's. How are you making it through? How are you muddling through everyday life that we all experience? The highs, the lows, the tragic, the joy. I think that's it doesn't have to be the darkest moment of your day or of your life. It could just mean a regular moment of your life. Or if it is the darkest moment, how did you find that light? What did you have to share with others? And I think ultimately, and this is what I hope to do in my book is to say at the end of the day, how are you telling your stories and sharing your stories in a way that's going to be for the common good, right? To help everyone, to help you heal, to bring your community together, and to respond to God's invitation to put ourselves at the service of God's creation, right? And I think that's what we need to, always be mindful of, those kind of those three steps along the way.
Yeah. That's so helpful, Eric, and I encourage all of our viewers today and participants, to start thinking about, the stories, and again to realize that they don't have to be, overly dramatic, but something that threw you for a loop, or you lost your footing, or pointed you in another direction. So you've given us a lot of excellent prompts, and in your book, what you do is that you divide up your approach into three themes, and we'd love to hear you unpack those a little bit now. And so the first section of your book, you talk about the overriding question of who am I? And you say we simply cannot answer the question who am I without digging deeply into our values. And that, I assume you're going to share that somehow digging into our values is going to be connected with looking at our stories. So tell us this notion of this overriding question of who am I, and how our stories can help us get in touch with who we are.
Yeah, so these three questions that form the structure of the book that we'll talk about came, they formed for me my second year of my undergraduate career at Fairfield University. We were in a living and learning community, and these questions were literally on the walls as you walk through the residence hall, and they framed our experience of being together in community, of asking questions, of discerning who God was inviting us to be, right? Our vocation, and it begins with who am I, right? You're telling a story of self. Who am I? What's my identity? What gets me up in the morning? What makes me tick? What are values and passions and insights that I hold to be important and think that I can add uniquely to the world. So I think the easiest thing to think about, right, for me at least, is a quasi Cannonball moment, and certainly kind of a falling on my face as far as values go. And to answer your question, how are values connected with storytelling? I think values underpin kind of, again, what we care about, what we're passionate about, and how we approach the things that we want to do in the world, and then ultimately, not to read ahead here, but ultimately get us into what will be the next question. But how do we build a shared values, shared community? How do we kind of find that common footing, even when we might disagree in other areas? So I'm thinking of, I was, read about this frequently in my book, but I was in Bolivia for about a year after I graduated undergrad, doing your classic year of service, right after your undergraduate career. And I went into Bolivia to that experience. I lived in Santa Cruz for a number of months, and then in a small, actually Japanese colony about 3 hours outside of Santa Cruz. And I went in just expecting a lot, thinking that, boy, they're lucky to have me. I got all these things to share. I got, they're going to have these profound spiritual conversations. And throughout the year, I kept falling on my face, again and again. And as I reflect, it's been many years of reflection. It's because the values I professed, right? Subsidiarity. I want to learn from people I'm with, right? A desire to be present to and accompany, walk with, these kinds of ideas that I, in theory professed, I was not manifesting in any way, right? I was going in with, well, I've got the answers. Why don't you do this for me? Like, why aren't you treating me X, Y, and Z way, right? Yeah. And so, as I reflect on that moment, a very important moment in my life, and in the various mistakes that I made, it's in large part because the values that I professed and the way I was living my life were not aligned. And had I again, reflected more or been better prepared, done this kind of storytelling work, seen kind of how do these values play out in my life, and how might I bring them into focus in this new context in Bolivia for the good of all involved and not just myself. I think that's it would have played out differently. So who am I in this scenario was a scenario of saying, well, I want to be this person and I'm falling short. So what do I need to do to make up the difference? And I think I think that's important, because I think, again, sometimes as we go through our story, our life story, we have to be honest with those places where we've fallen short. We haven't quite lived up to the values we profess, the values that we get from, our faith stories. We look through scripture, or our family stories. What have our families instilled in us, passed down to us? What are our friends, the people we surround ourselves with, what do they lift up as important? And that's where our values in a lot of ways come from. And then we have the opportunity each day to see if we're making it, or if we're falling short.
And then it seems to me that the telling of the stories of those experiences are ways of reminding ourselves who we are, and also ways of sharing with other people who are striving to learn who they are, that they hear our story and how we came to that realization. Many of our experiences do teach us. They can humble us. I'm thinking of a similar story that I had on a much smaller scale when I was in Los Angeles a couple of months ago for a conference. And after we had a big dinner, and I packed up some leftovers from the dinner, and I thought, I'm going to find some homeless people to give, the food to, and they'll be so, appreciative of, my thoughtfulness and so on. And I found a few homeless people there that were gathering and getting set. And I said, is anyone interested in some leftovers? And one of the women said, ask her, like there was someone in charge. And so I asked the woman, and she said, what do you got? And so I told her what my leftovers were. She said, yeah, put them there. And it was like, okay, that was the extent of our exchanges. And it just reminded me that, here I was thinking that, I'm doing such a special thing. And for the folks I was trying to serve, it was just, another part of their day, another person coming along and offering them something. And it's just, it's humbling. And so when I tell that story to people, it's like a reminder, to myself, stop thinking of yourself as, doing such wonderful things. Just, you're just trying to be with people and help people. So our stories remind us, don't they? And then they shape us and they shape other people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that as you're talking, it reminds me of the two standards, right, in the spiritual exercises. You're talking about Ignatian spirituality, and are we pursuing right, the standard of Christ, humility, poverty, rejection, or are we pursuing the standard of the enemy, which would, riches, honor, and pride? And those might sound like kind of abstract theological things, but they're really kind of like signposts that we can put down in our story as we're going and say, well, where was I leaning in these different scenarios? I was after pride in this one because I wanted to be kind of pat on the back for my good work in Bolivia or whatever. And I think that as we use the tools of Ignatian spirituality and layer them into our reflection on storytelling, we get a lot of that. It unpacks. It kind of we open new avenues for exploration. If you're thinking like in a video game, you open a new level and you get to go, oh, I get to pursue a new you open a new map, you get to find something new and explore something new and mine the riches of a new area of my own life that I might not have realized earlier.
I love that, the opening of a new level. My son is a big video game player, and that was always the thing, get to a new level. And, it's not that our spiritual life is, trying to achieve things, but it's an opening of a door to a new reality, not so much, a climbing of levels, but a new reality. And stories are ways of opening those doors and perhaps keeping them open so they don't shut.
Think about, right, cure personalis, another care for the whole person, another Ignatian principle. The whole person, that's all of us, right? All of our stories. And the more we can see the fullness of ourself and bring that before God, the more we're able to reconcile, heal, grow, learn. You're right. The spiritual life is not linear, absolutely not. But it's more of a deepening. How are we getting deeper in knowledge of ourselves and God and one another, right? Ultimately, it's we're not in this alone. So,
and how much, I'm thinking too, how much we enjoy, listening to other people's stories because we learn from those stories. I love when people share experiences, and social media, I think, has enabled us to hear other people's stories. We sometimes will just even put out there on social media, who else went through this? How did you handle it? And people, share their stories. You move on in your book to the second question, in which it sounds similar. Who am I? But a couple of letters change the whole shape of the question. Whose am I? And you say here, as we craft and share our stories, never forget that we belong to others, to a community, and not solely to ourselves. So you touched on this a little bit, but break this open for us a little bit more, how stories remind us of our connections with a larger community.
Yeah, I think, right, we have to start with ourselves first, right? The love your neighbor as you love yourself. If we don't love ourselves, we can't love our neighbor, right? So we start with who am I, so we can love ourselves. But then that necessarily flows over into loving others. As imperfect as we all are at that work, or I'll speak for myself at least, right? And that makes us think of and asks questions pertaining to our community, our neighborhood, our family, the people in our home or in our apartment building, the people in our country, people that are experiencing life differently than we are for a whole variety of reasons, right? We have to care about that. We have to bring our stories into conversation with their stories, because again, cure personalis, care for the whole person. Then we want to zoom out. We want to care for all of God's people, all of God's creation, right? We're all made in the image and likeness of God. God is dealing directly with God's beloved, which is everybody, right? All of creation. And so, we do that work for ourselves, and then we have to go out. I have a bunch of stories in the book, but the thing that I just think of in my daily practice is parenting, right? Like, I wake up in the morning and it's not because I just rolled out of bed and was like, wow, I feel refreshed. It was because someone's screaming, or the cat jumped in the room, or, any number of things. I think that's an easy example. And some of us have that experience, and some of us have any number of other experiences. But I think we have to remember that that other people have kind of claims on our time, and we can be really possessive and kind of close in and say, nope, this is for me. Or we can be generous and giving and open ourselves out. And it doesn't mean we run ourselves dry. We have to care for ourselves, because again, if we don't love ourselves, we can't love our neighbors, right? So it doesn't mean we just give and give and give until there's nothing left, but it does mean that our lives are a constant kind of fluid dance or conversation with others, and we're always asking, how is my story in conversation with yours? How is it maybe butting up against your story? How can we compromise and again expand that story so that it's big enough for all of us?
Yeah, as you're talking, Eric, it looks like Eric just froze for a second there, so I'm hoping he's going to come back. But as he was talking, it made me think of Eric. You froze for a moment there, so we missed a few seconds of what you said.
Am I back?
You're back now. You're with us.
Sorry about that.
That's
okay. The internet said you're talking too long. We're going to cut you off.
And I guarantee you, I didn't cut you off or freeze you. It was some demon in the little workings of the webinar here.
Yeah, the ghost in the machine.
Yeah, but as you were talking, Eric, it made me think of family reunions, which we enjoy. We haven't had one since before the pandemic, and how much storytelling goes on there. And they're stories of our family, the stories of the community, shared stories. And when you meet with cousins and aunts and uncles, and they're telling you stories of people that you know, and you're seeing, how do they compare to the stories I have of that person or those people? That's what I thought of as you were talking, that we have family stories that shaped us, people who shaped us, and then the stories that go with them. And I think that's why so many people today are into ancestry.com. They're trying to figure out their story, which helps them understand not only who am I, but whose am I.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that again, conversation with family, I think also a sense of place. People, I think there's a lot of power in if your family comes from a certain place, going to that place and kind of, I think place has memory, right? We were just on this Ignatian pilgrimage, and that was kind of a theme that we were invited to reflect on. Place has memory. Who else has stood in this place? what has happened to them, what did it inspire them to do, or what does it keep them from doing. And again, that all is wrapped up in this idea that we belong together. Our story. I mean, like, again, what's the communion of saints? This isn't a theological answer, but it's we're all going to God together. We're all standing on one another's stories. We're looking back through time and trying to learn from someone else who muddled through this life, and bring it into our current situation, so that we can glean something of use. So I think that's it. I also hope that, I don't know if you can hear my cat, but he's very upset right outside the door. So if you hear any meowing, that's what
No,
it is.
I didn't. Maybe some other folks did, but that's all part of your story, right? The
Yes.
cat is a main character.
Yeah, increasingly so. Yeah.
I love it. It made me think too, while you were talking, of how other people shape us, and then the stories we tell about those people. Just recently, I was chatting with my wife. We were reading a book together about personality types, and I was describing my personality type, and one of the descriptions is that we're people who don't ask for much. We were taught not to ask for much. And I said, when I was a kid, I remember my dad telling me, when you have people over to your house, you ask them what they would like to watch on TV. And if you go to visit someone else's house, you watch what they have on TV. And I thought, when do I get to watch what I what I want? And I thought, there's a story that why do I remember that story? For it made an impression on me that I'm not supposed to ask for anything. I'm not supposed to say, I want this, I want that. And so, those stories can really help us to understand ourselves and how other people formed who we are. I am my father's son.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. And as I said, in my book, I have a lot of reflections on my grandparents. And one of the things that always struck me was, we would always go at my grandparents' house. We would always go, and the topic of conversation would always turn to kind of like the price of lettuce or something, whatever's on sale at the grocery store. And it seems like very peculiar, I think, to an outsider to be like, why is that? Like, you spend like 20 minutes talking about like the sale, like how inexpensive lasagna was this week. But it points to, for me, a number of things. It points to this comfort, this kind of, you're talking about nothing, and yet you're talking about, like the experience of these two people that had immigrant parents that really saved and worked hard to provide for their children, who then saved and worked hard to provide for their children, and this idea that saving 20 cents on lettuce once a week is a reminder that it's kind of it's a recognition of that family lineage, but it's also just a reminder of family in general. For me, it's that sense of this is a place of comfort and ease and familiarity, and we honor those who've come before, because this is the kind of stuff that makes sense and matters now for us. And again, that's my family. It probably sounds insane to others. And I think in that you see a little bit of that, and you described this too, Joe, that maybe that tension between stories. But when you talk about it, and when you get to the values at the root, right, the value of that story isn't saving 20 cents on lettuce. The value of that story is family. And when you get down to what it really points to, well, then I bet you find a lot of common ground between you and other people.
I was just going to use that word, Eric, commonalities, because as you were describing that, I thought, that's my mom. Oh my goodness, my mom used to, when we would talk to her, the first couple of minutes of our conversation would be, she was so proud of where she saved 15 cents, buying something. So not to go off on that, but the idea of commonalities, hearing someone
Yeah.
else's story makes you think, wow, that's like me, or my family, or my people, or whatever you want to say. Eric, in the last part of your book, you point us forward. Who am I called to be? That we use these stories and we use these cannonball moments, not to just live in the past, or not to wallow in our pain, but to move forward, as St. Ignatius did. You said that cannonball moment thrust him into a totally new future. And so you say the stories we tell are stories that must weave themselves into the imaginations of our listeners, inviting them into the long, hard work, the ongoing struggle of reconciliation. In other words, the storytelling and cannonball moments should point us to the future and challenge us and invite us to get to work and roll up our sleeves. So unpack that for us, please.
Yeah, I think, that question of who am I called to be necessarily circles back to the who am I, right? You've kind of reflected on yourself. How do I love myself? How does that mean I love my neighbor? And then how does that propel me forward in this moment, in the, responding to the signs of the time? What does this moment require of me? Not what happened in the past for the saints of 50, 100, 500 years ago, but in this present moment. And that really gets at vocation, right? I think that gets at this kind of confluence of who I am and what I bring to the table, and what my community, the community in which I'm situated, and then what's the needs of the moment. And a story I think of this, I used to work at Catholic Relief Services here in Baltimore, and I used to ride the bus to work every morning. And in Baltimore, there's a lot of Hopkins students and doctors and nurses. And I would sit in this bus and I would look at these people and I say, wow, these people are really helping people. I wish I could help people like they help people. But Catholic Relief Services is a great organization that helps a lot of people every single day, right? And for me, I was seeing this one way of helping people. And then recognizing, oh wait, I get nauseous talking about blood. I can't possibly I cut myself and I faint. That's not what I'm called to do. But this idea of the value is there's a desire to help people, right? Those are very different ways of helping. Being in the emergency room and being in another country, providing humanitarian relief. Those are very different situations, but both very powerful expressions of caring for others, right? Of both charity and justice. And I think it took me a while to realize again, I have to reflect on who am I called to be. I'm not called to be a doctor. I don't have any of those skills or desires or passions or temperament. But someone who writes and can tell stories and can work with media and stuff. That's where my skill set is. So how can that help people in a real way? How can I channel that value, very generic value, help people, right? But how can I channel that in a way that is true to who I am, true to the need of the moment, and situated in the community in which I find myself? And I think that's again, that's the task of vocation, of discernment, of which there's a lot of Ignatian tools and a lot of good books at Loyola Press to help you to make sense of that, right?
Well, thank you very much for the little shout out for Loyola Press. And we're one book better now that we have Cannonball Moments. It is a wonderful read. And you've just taken us through the three parts of the book, as well as the introduction, and helped us to understand this notion of what a cannonball moment is, how each of us has, in a sense, a cannonball moment or moments, and then how that's related to storytelling and the spirituality of storytelling. I want to remind our participants here that in a few moments, we're going to open up for some Q&A. Please feel free to go to the chat or the Q&A and to put any thoughts or questions that you have for Eric or insights of your own that you'd like to share. And I'll be asking for help from my colleague Denise, who sifts through all of the chat and Q&A to make sure I'm not missing something that is a question. But we're going to get to that in just a moment. But before we do, I wanted to ask you, Eric, to take us through the conclusion of your book, in which you use the image of a pilgrimage. And as I mentioned much earlier, that's how I came to know much of the story of St. Ignatius, was by going on a pilgrimage, following in his footsteps. And you say that the pilgrim knows that it's not just about getting to the final destination, it's about what happens along the way. And so why did you choose this image as something to wrap up your book, and what does it encourage your readers to reflect on in their own lives?
Yeah, well, that image you have there is of my wife and I when we walked the Community de Santiago, and that was a cat, a kid, and a pandemic ago. So we just look very young and spry, I think. But but I think the idea of pilgrimage, of being a pilgrim people on the move, is as essential to our stories, right? And it's also very Ignatian in the sense that Ignatius himself, after this conversion moment, he refers to himself as the pilgrim, in his autobiography, and in his writings, right? So it's grounded in that sense. But I think there's one piece that stuck with me from this pilgrimage when Ali and I were on the Camino de Santiago. We got to the end of it. We walked 5 days. So if you're familiar with the Camino, we started in Sarria, and we walked about 100 or 105 kilometers, whatever it is, which is like the minimum you do to count as a pilgrim. And so that was really weighing on our minds, like, man, like we really wish we could do more. We should have done more. Da, 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 da. When we got to the end, we met with some friends of ours for dinner who had done the pilgrimage many, many times. They were pros. And we were wringing our hands and lamenting, oh, you guys are real pilgrims. We're just, tourists with boots here. And they were like, no, you did a Camino, your Camino. And that was so like subtle and essential to me that the pilgrimage is different for everyone. And necessarily so. And the fact that we did our version, a Camino, that there's countless Caminos in that sense. We think of the Camino de Santiago, but each person's Camino is their own Camino. So how many versions then are there? Countless, impossible to know. But that idea that it was ours and sacred to us is how we should look at our stories, right? Our stories are our own, sacred, and something that we continue working through, so and needing to kind of bless in that sense. God is here in our life stories, and it's worth talking. So I'll stop there because I don't want to take up all the time for questions.
Well, I think it's a wonderful way to end the book. It's a great image for us. And not everyone has been on a pilgrimage, but we understand what a pilgrimage is. And I think we should always, think of our own mini pilgrimages that we take in our own lives. They don't all have to be to a foreign country or to an exotic place, but, we have our journeys that we go through. I think it's a great image. It's a wonderful book. And congratulations, Eric, on Cannonball Moments. I wish you nothing but success on this, and we're so excited at Loyola Press to have you have this book in our midst. And we're not going to let you go yet because we have some Q&A coming up right now. And so let me go ahead to that screen, and I'm looking at the Q&A, and I see the first one that pops up from Carl. He asks, is there a common plot in each of our stories, excuse me, that includes such things as death, burial, resurrection? In other words, do our stories kind of woven together by common themes?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think that there are common themes to our stories, or have to be, right? Like, what's the old saying, like death and taxes, right, are the unavoidable parts of our stories. But I think that I always remember a Jesuit friend of mine said at Fairfield, when I was working on fiction, he said, tell an Easter story. And I was like, what does that mean, an Easter story? And he said, it's a story of resurrection. It's a story of transformation. And those stories are stories that resonate with everybody across everyone's experience. So yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. I think you're right on. Like, we enter the world and we experience what the new, and we grow and we change, and we kind of we experience suffering and challenge and ultimately death. But I think there are commonalities in the story of our lives that include hardship and hardship and resurrection and renewal. That's where we can look for those shared values to build from. And I do talk about that a bit in my book too, because I think that's a really important point. Thank you for that question.
Well, thank you for that question and for your answer, Eric. And Teresa asks a very practical question. She says, I'm considering using your book in a first-year seminar at Scranton. I'm wondering about pace. Could I ask students to work through each part? So cover the text in 3 days, maybe over the course of 3 weeks, or 1 day a week, etc. Or would taking each chapter on its own with students and spending a class period on each chapter, possibly spreading them out throughout the semester, be better? Do you have any thoughts about how someone could use this in a setting like that, and how they can pace?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that. I really appreciate it. That's awesome that you're considering using it in a classroom. I hope it's helpful. I think that at the end of, I think that any number of things are possible, right? I think that the sections themselves, those 3 questions, could make up 3 sections of a class, 3 classes or whatever. But I also, at the end of each chapter, you'll find kind of detailed Ignatian storytelling exercises, and those could be things that you really kind of go throughout the semester with, inviting people to pray with. I think that this book is meant in a lot of ways as a retreat to be done personally, a retreat to be done in community, a retreat to be done that then is, as you've alluded to here, can be grounded or broadened with a kind of academic context. So I think those 3 questions are really important and can be used as maybe even 3 parts of a semester.
Good. I'm glad that we designed our discussion today around those 3 parts. I think that should be very helpful to the person who asked that question. Looking at the next one from Dorothea, let me scroll up here because another one came in and knocked it off. Here, Dorothea says, your year in the Ignatian Residential College included many activities, classes adapted to the 3 questions, dorm activities and various exercises, activities in the mentor groups. Can you describe which you found most powerful for you and why? And tell us that story, please.
Yeah, that's an insider question. So we had these retreats that were, as you know, we had these retreats that were kind of paired with each of the questions, and each of the retreats were a time to dive deep into the questions with this mentor group, which was mentioned, which were just kind of small faith sharing. So the group would meet throughout the semester, but then you really went deep with the group at these retreats. And one of the things that I remember, again, it was from the same Jesuit, Father Jim Mazik. He had a team that developed these really wonderful, almost like quasi trailers for each of the questions that pulled from pop culture. And I love that. I think that, Ignatian spirituality throws us into the world, right? And so the more we can see and experience Ignatian spirituality in all things, God in all things, I think the more we can then encounter God just in our own prayer. And so having those retreat times set aside where we could go deep with that group of friends that we were developing over the whole year, ask questions that were maybe beyond the classroom, and then be inspired by these real and intentional encounters with pop culture, with culture in general, I think was just spot on. And again, for those who know Fairfield, there's a plaque right outside of the where the Ignatian Residential College was when I was a student there, that invited us to consider a vocation. And I forget, those will probably know on the call, but it says, what's your vocations where your deepest desires and passions intersect with the world's greatest needs. And I think that kind of literally stepping over that every day is a reminder of the importance of our stories.
Wonderful. Great questions and great answers for that. I'm going to pick one more here, and then I'm going to ask Denise if I'm missing any that she really thinks I should talk about. Tim says, in the new world of working from home, hybrid working, or being out of work, how much harder is it to be part of different communities? Some communities no longer exist as they once did. This makes who am I called to be so much tougher to discern. It's a good question.
Yeah, no, the world has changed and continues to shift, I think, under us, and around us, and as part of us, with pandemic and everything that's happened. I think you have to answer those questions in order, right? You start with who am I, and you see where does that propel you? What does that? How do you make sense of yourself? Who am I? And then how does that propel you to answer the question, whose am I? This is a question that my wife and I often reflect on, as we think about that very question with 2 little girls running around the house and only so much time in the day, and how can we, respect the communities that we're part of, and then make, a meaningful difference, or, give of ourselves in a meaningful way, that is, in tune with what God is inviting us, and in tune with our own skills. It's not an easy question, but I think that it's, you think you go in that order. Who am I? Whose am I? Who am I called to be? And you have to be gentle with yourself. I think that's the other thing that's most important to remember with everything, the world as it is God delights in us. I think when I first encountered that from my again old friend and spiritual director, God delights in us, and that means that we can take some time and be gentle with ourselves, be gentle with one another, and feel it out. Who are we called to be in this moment? It might take a little bit of time. It might take some false starts. It might take some missteps and some mistakes, but we keep pressing on and muddling on. And I think that's how the story continues, right? And that's what's most important.
The great advice. We can be very tough on ourselves, and I love that you're inviting us to be gentle with ourselves. It's wonderful spiritual advice. I just want to check in with my colleague Denise. Denise, did you spot something that you think just we gotta ask Eric this question?
Well, there's so many good questions coming in here, Eric. I did see one that I think you've touched on, but I really think it speaks to what we're saying. Ed asks, might the cannonball really be a gentle breeze?
Wow.
Yeah.
And I think that's his own reflection, but I'd like to hear your response.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think that's a great observation. And I think it's, I love that scripture, right? Geez, I'm going to mess it up. Is it Elijah? I think it's Elijah who's on the mountain, right?
Right.
And God's like, I'm not coming as the fire. I'm not coming as the thunderstorm. I'm not coming as the avalanche or all these different things. God, I'm coming as a silent breeze. And yes, that can be a cannonball moment, because again, it doesn't have to be loud. And our attention is taken by the loud and the traumatic and the exciting and the dangerous, right? And sometimes that's good and right. But also, a lot of us just have that quiet breeze, the regular, mundane happenstance of our lives, and that's where God is too, just as present, just as much. And so 100% affirm that, and I do touch on that in my book as well, because my cannonball moments probably pale in comparison to some, if you were to compare them based on loudness and things like that. But we don't compare them, right? We recognize the God at work in all of our stories, still pressing on.
I'm so glad that you brought that question up, Denise. It's a deep question, a beautiful question. And Eric, the way you're describing it is that, to put it in my own words, that not all of us necessarily have cannon or being struck by a cannonball, but maybe we're being bombarded with popcorn, and we need to pay attention to that in the same way that these little pellets of something hitting us can be calling our attention to shift direction, to change in some ways. So that scripture story of Elijah really helps us to put that all into perspective about how God calls us. Sometimes it's a cannonball, sometimes it's being knocked off the horse, other times it's the whisper. And so thanks for covering all of that for us. Last word, Eric, anything you want to leave us with as we prepare to sign off here? What are your wishes for our readers and participants as we go forward?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity and all the comments here. I encourage people to go to check out the book, to check out my website and other writings at ericclaytonwrites.com. And I know it's been alluded to in the chat here, but I do have a weekly email series that comes out Wednesday mornings. And then you can get that at jesuits.org/weekly. That's a kind of a constant contact form, and then you'll get to hear from me every Wednesday. So be forewarned.
That's awesome, Eric. And I'm sure a lot of people who participated are eager to listen to you. You have a wonderful, engaging style, both in speaking and writing. And we're glad at Loyola Press that we're perhaps able to bring you to a larger audience. And we hope more people continue to engage with you, because you're inviting people on a wonderful journey, continuing the work of St. Ignatius, and inviting all of us to find God in our everyday, to find God in the mundane and in the explosive, as in a cannonball. And that's an important work. I think more than ever today, people are wondering, where is God? And if we can find God in our everyday lives, that's a gift. So thank you, Eric, so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you.
Well, folks, I want to thank all of you for participating and being a part of this webinar. Once again, you can find Eric's book, Cannonball Moments, Telling Your Story, Deepening Your Faith, at store.loyolapress.com. You can call Loyola Press at 800-621-1008. I have the QR code on the screen once again, if you want to just go ahead and scan that, and it'll take you right to the book. And a reminder, once again, that this webinar has been recorded, and you will be sent a copy of this recording very soon, within a couple of days. And thank you once again. And may we all continue to find God in our everyday lives and continue to spread the good news of Jesus Christ and the nearness of God in all that we do. Thank you, and God bless.